Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the second session. It's about archiving and tracing global Palestine. We'll start with our first speaker, Amany Al-Sayyed. So, Amany is instructor of Rhetoric and Composition at the American University of Beirut, currently completing a second graduate degree in Communications and Social Justice in Canada. Amani spent the last 10 years unearthing her late father's legacy as a Palestinian intellectual, novelist, and radio broadcaster from Malta, Ghana, and Lebanon. Her focus is on the history of the Palestinian personality that protected the culture via acoustic radio resistance and the writers' movement simultaneously. She reads in Italian, Arabic, and Maltese, which is no coincidence. Her upbringing and education marks the anti-colonial movement of her father's decision as he moved away from the refugee camps into the decolonial European continent of the 18th and 19th. Thank you, Amani. The first yours. You can start.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to share screen with everybody.
Yeah. Yes,
There we go. I think you can see.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, right, let's begin. So today I'm going to talk to you about my journey from 10 years ago when I had arrived to Lebanon from Canada as someone who is coming to teach at the American University of Beirut English. I am not trained in anything that has to do with archives, and I was coming back from Canada to take on this job, and suddenly I met my Palestinian family, as all of us do, and that changed everything. So, this presentation is based from that moment of birthing my story as a Palestinian and having to confront my history. So this presentation is called Between the Archive and the Self, documenting my father confronting my Palestinianness, because one of the items that my family gave to me was a tape that had survived. So my father back in 1982 was working as a radio broadcaster for Radio Mediterranean in Malta. And I will describe the station more, but that station was funded and sponsored by the PLO at the time. And my father used to send items to his family in Lebanon as souvenirs. The only surviving item is this tape that you see in front of you, this cassette, which is now archived at the American University of Beirut. So today I'm going to tell you the story of how I confronted this moment and what I did when I was given this tape. So I need a little bit of a background. When I was given this moment, my Palestinianness was very much in an infantile stage, very childlike, very underdeveloped. It's almost like that of a child still getting to know her Palestinianness because I had no background in Canada of what it meant to be Palestinian. So, as soon as I got this tape, I decided, just like any child who's very proud of her father but doesn't really understand any of his legacy, I decided that I'm going to study this cassette and I'm going to place my father as a hero in Palestinian history, as we all do, don't we? So, I set out to do that. So, the first question that I asked myself, what was broadcasting like in Malta, where I grew up? Because where I grew up in Malta, I went to school, I had friends, I had a regular life, but my father was not living on the ground in Malta. He was living in the air, in the frequencies, up in the actual um, radio culture that was up in the sky. So he wasn't really experiencing Malta like I was. So the first thing I asked myself was, what was the sky like in Malta? So I'll give you a brief background of this place. Malta was not an innocent place. In World War II, Britain used Malta as a radar station, establishing a triangulation network to monitor enemy aircraft. So as soon as I started to understand what is this Malta, this innocent place where I grew up, as soon as I started to study the broadcasting scene, war narratives started to come up. So in this radar station, the data was sent to underground tunnels known as war rooms from where the defense of Malta operated. So, previous to 1982, when we landed in Malta, This place was very much operated as a war station. These rooms that were operated in Malta as broadcasting rooms were also used as part of a NATO operation HQ or headquarters during the Cold War. So before we arrived, this was very much the scene. The National War Museum, they actually have a war museum for anyone who would like to go see. It's still there, gives access to enemy aircraft, board indicators, aircraft models, and original artifacts. So this was the culture at the time of the Maltese broadcasting scene. So therefore, Malta was very friendly with the British during World War II and was actively supporting the Allied war effort. But after the war, Britain's financial situation was strained and it could no longer afford the investment in Malta as a war, as its ally. Unemployment went up, and so this led to Malta fighting for its independence from Britain in 1960. So there was a breakup between Malta and Britain. So it was on to the next relationship for Malta, which is when we arrived around 1982, 1983. Malta joined the non-alignment movement, as a lot of you know, which was a set of independent countries on the globe, largely from Africa and Asia, that didn't want to align with either the US-led Western Bloc or the Soviet-led Eastern Bloc from the Cold War. So Malta joined that, but it also decided to join the European Commonwealth. So it kind of tried to play nice with the north and with the south of the globe. So the European Commonwealth was made up of 56 sovereign states aimed to prevent future wars. And so Malta joined this and it joined the Global South non-alignment movement as well. So, as you can kind of guess, there was a saturation on the ground with the history of Malta being very much involved in war and then post-war independence. So, as I started to study this, I noticed that when I studied the broadcasting scene, it gave me much more information and data about what was happening in Malta than if I were studying Malta historically on the ground. So the questions that came up to me was, what nations in the Mediterranean bought radio stations at the time? So as I started to study specifically the broadcasting scene, who was buying stations there? How was Malta managing the radio frequencies at the time? I mean, was it still functioning as a war station? Even post-independence, or did that stop? And were they using the transmitters only for broadcasting? Why did Britain still own transmission stations in Malta even post-independence? So I set off to continue my research. So broadcasting in Malta was monopolized by the state of Malta. It was monitored by the Broadcasting Authority, and it was accused very quickly of bias. So, this authority, which was supposed to monitor all the radio stations in the Mediterranean, was accused of being biased. So, the MBA had no legal authority to act for 3.5 years between 1983 and 1986. So, Radio Mediterranean started in 1983, and it was monitored by this sort of illegal broadcasting authority in Malta. And what this authority did is it chose some stations to operate while not allowing other stations to operate. So in this chaos of legality between picking and choosing who got to have voice on on the Mediterranean airwaves, enters the Middle East. Here enters Radio Mediterranean, and let me tell you more about it. It was funded by the Maltese government and by the Algerian governments, but it was not contracted or allowed to function by the authority, but it was allowed to function by the government of Malta. At other stations that were created at the time with Radio Mediterranean was Voice of Friendship and Solidarity, funded by Libya, promoting Gaddafi's Green Book. This one was also not contracted by the authority, but it was allowed by the government. Same thing in the air was the Voice of the Mediterranean, which was funded entirely by two areas, Libya and Malta. And this was shortwave, and shortwave meant that it could go into international distance and it could bypass censorship. So this was the scenario of the broadcasting scene in Malta. Here, from the Maltese archives that I found, there's the agreement of cooperation in the field of information between the Republic of Malta and the Democratic and Popular Republic of Algeria. And in their records, the reason why they set up a radio station, Radio Mediterranean, conjointly was, as you can see on the right-hand side, in order to increase friendship and neighborly relations that exist between the two countries. And it also desired to develop cooperation in the field of information between the two states. Also, sorry for the font being not clear, but what this is another item from the archives, the Maltese archives, when a radio station at the time sent a program to another, from one country to the other country, they sent themselves postcards to confirm that the country receiving the frequencies actually received the frequency, the radio programming. So, for example, here, Radio Mediterranean, here sent in April of 1983, it says that they received the transmission from Radio Mediterranean in Sicily, in Italy, in Sicily. So here the Italians are telling the Maltese, we received your radio transmission from Radio Mediterranean in Malta. And this was how they documented broadcasting going from one country to the other in the Mediterranean. And these are all archived in Malta. So here my question became, what were they covering in 1982 in Radio Mediterranean? And how did they design the program as a liberation radio? Because Radio Mediterranean prided itself on being a liberation radio based on liberation movement. So just a little bit of history of how it designed, or which legacy of radio it actually followed. It followed the Palestine Broadcasting Service back in Palestine, which was created in 1936. The PBS, Palestine Broadcasting Service, was actually modeled after the BBC during Mandate Palestine. And it was created during the Great Revolt, as most of you know, from 1936. And it was designed to convince farmers to not revolt against the British in Palestine. So the PBS Arabic section was called Radio Al-Quds, and it was directed by Ibrahim Toukan. He was a respected Arabic language teacher at AUB, at the American University of Beirut, and he advocated for nationalism and for resistance against foreign colonialism very much. And he defended the language, Arabic, as it being the main language for broadcasting for the PBS, but he was quickly fired by the station in 1940 for being too traditional. So as I went on, me being the little girl who wants to prove that her father is a very Palestinian hero, I was thinking, since my father was the Arabic director of Radio Mediterranean, and since he was an Arabic teacher in Shuwaifat in Beirut, and since he did publish poems like Toukan, he must have been the Ibrahim Toukan of Malta. And I was so happy to finally think that my father was a hero, just like Ibrahim Toukan. But unfortunately, quickly I grew up, and as I continued to do research, I knew that it wasn't all based on my imagination. There was something called an archive. So, as you all know, in 1982, which is the year that Radio Mediterranean was created, the PLO archival offices in Beirut were looted and robbed by Israel. So, as the research says, in 82, the PLO evacuated Beirut, and the Israeli forces sequestered the archive, which consisted of 25,000 volumes in Arabic and so on. So 2 years later, the Israelis returned the archive, minus the film collection, to the Palestinians, who subsequently moved the whole archive, to Cyprus. So this is evidence that it is safe to assume that the Palestinians were moving their archival projects in the Mediterranean as a reaction to this narrative. So one of the ways that they did move the archive was through radio broadcasting in order to protect what was taken in Beirut. So let me tell you what the radio station was about and how it was actually designed. Let's get to the details. So it was Arabic. One section was in Arabic. The other part was global news. The other part was Palestinian and Algerian folklore music. And then there was news for the Mediterranean region. Then there was weather. Then there was poetry and music. And then there was news about the global south. And then there was interviews with politicians from Beirut. And then the second part was the coverage of the Non-Alignment Movement Summit, which was taking part in India. The Radio Mediterranean was covering that, and then it continued to do other things. It only went for 1 hour. And it was very much designed after the Palestine Broadcasting Service of Palestine itself, which designed its program generally exactly the same way. So they followed the template. But the only difference was what was happening in 1982 was not happening in 1936 in Mandate Palestine, like the non-alignment movement and like the politicians like Abdullah Sadeh, who was visiting Malta at the time. So the frequency was shortwave, which meant that it reached international audiences. As I said, it was operated by Malta and Algeria. But what I want to add is it functioned in 3 languages, which was also what the PBS in Palestine did. They did English, Arabic, and French. But in the PBS, they did Hebrew and Arabic and English. So when I looked up the Palestine Poster Project archive, I found that this poster, which was from 1983, and it was about the solidarity with the Lebanese and Palestinian people, very much like what we're doing here. It was a conference that was held in Malta in 1982. And this conference was the people that went to it were politicians from Lebanon and from the Mediterranean who were eager to unite the discourse on Palestine and Lebanon and to create an archive, a broadcasting archive. And this poster here is evidence from the actual AUB archives, not the Maltese archives, that this event happened. And in Arabic, it says إدعموا نضال الشعبين الفلسطيني واللبناني. And it's very much what was covered in the cassette. So in the cassette, the interviews that my father runs were of the people that attended this conference. And I'm going to play something just to represent that this actually happened. And I hope that the sound is clear. Sorry.
في فاليتا عاصمة مالطا مؤخرا مؤتمر دولي للتضامن مع شعب لبنان ولنصرة شعب فلسطين، وقد شاركت في المناقشات وفودا من مختلف أنحاء العالم. هذا وقد التقينا بالدكتور عبد الله السعادي ممثل الحزب السوري القومي الاجتماعي
So, as you can see, the poster represents joining hands and coming together. And this was at a time when Chatzitheodoro was happening in Lebanon, and the PLO presence was increasing every day. And on the other side, in the Mediterranean, Oh,
Okay,
It's
now
gone
it's
now.
good. Now we can hear you.
perfect. Sorry about that. So what I was saying is that the poster here represents the coming together with the hands against the common enemy at the time. And this was happening at a time when in Beirut, the Sabra and Shatila massacre was just happening, and the PLO presence was increasing in Beirut, while in Malta, they were doing the opposite. They were driving the narrative of unity and of coming together against the common enemy. So moving along from here, this is a note on myself and how I was confronting all this information as someone who was not born and raised in Lebanon or anywhere near Palestine. So as I was archiving all this information and I was archiving my father's published books and the cassette, um, as I confronted these overwhelming information frontiers, it felt like my voice lost its play, my writing lost direction. And I asked myself, how did I end up here in this history of my father? So my testimony lost its fuzzy ability to be free and to be open, and I no longer could describe the feeling of existing in a saturated atmosphere as a storyteller. My language failed, and my approach was troubled and burdened by information that I couldn't hold in one narrative. So I quickly turned to my father's poetry that was in the cassette in order to take cues of how to narrate and continue the sentence moving forward without stopping and breaking. In this recording, my father describes the feeling of departing from your home in Palestine towards the unknown, under a sky saturated with bombs, not knowing where you're going, not having a passport, and the only thing that you have is the memory of your beloved Palestine. I would play it. I'm going to play it represent.
أمس وفي زحمة القنابل خرجت من بيتي عاريا بلا هوية عاريا إلا من اسمك ومن هد عينيك أحمله رداء يا أهداب عينيك فأنا لولاها لأغلقت فؤادي والتممت على ظلي وحيدا. إنما وداع مسافر سامحيني أمس وفي زحمة.
هلا, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
I'm not sure if you could hear the Radio Mediterranean, but the recording is very old. So as I continued to do this research in order to understand how to narrate it and how to tell the story, it very much felt like the atmosphere that they existed in leaked between air and ground. And the entire story acquired a very voluminous depth that must be treated as such. So my first concern was not to simplify the story. At this stage of my work, and the presentation that I gave you today is only the tip of the iceberg. It's only the beginning of what research I found and where I'm going with this. So at this stage of my work, I learned to get comfortable as a narrator, as a storyteller, with stories that bleed, to be combative about freedom, yet warm and playful. I write and compose as a woman and daughter of a bleeding Palestinianness. I sit on an infinite spectrum of possibilities to frame my prose. So my ear detects the quiet sound of pain. My writing is present and evolving with my people. So the story will always continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. Thank you, Amany. Sorry. Thank you for this interesting presentation, insightful, and for your contribution. We now open the floor for questions. Thank We have one comment. Your methodology is very interesting. Thank you for the highlighting the lived experience of your hero father. This is how we can enrich the primary resources and change the collective narrative.
Yes, very much indeed.
Thank you, Zaynab. And may I just suggest we take all the questions together at the end?
At the end, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So we will move speaker for this session. Okay, thank you, Mariam. We have now Christina Chatzitheodoro. She got her PhD from the University of Glasgow, focusing on women's participation and left-wing resistance movement during the Second World War in Greece, Italy, and France. She is about to start a postdoc position at National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, examining radical ephemera of Greek and Portuguese student and anti-imperialist narratives of solidarity. She has created and curated a digital archive of solidarity with material from the Greek Solidarity to Palestine, which now has its own site and first publication in Greek, Arabic, and English. She speaks fluently Greek, English, French, Italian, Spanish, and a bit of Portuguese and Turkish while she's learning Arabic. Good for you in Arabic now. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First, I will share my screen because I have a PowerPoint to share.
Okay, we can see your screen.
You can see my screen. Okay, so I just need to put my play from the start. Okay, so you can see perfectly, right? I'm guessing.
Yes.
Okay, so first I need to say a few things about the archives that you will see in the presentation. Most of them are available on the site I have curated, actually all of them, apart from some that we will talk about in the presentation. So if you need more information about the archives, you can find them on the site. I have more information at the end of the presentation. So the talk will first examine archives of Greek solidarity with Palestine from the late 60s up until now. It will start with archives from the late 60s and early 70s during what is called in Greece Δικτατορία των Συνταγματαρχών. In English, it's regime of the colonels. And move forward to examine archives from the late 70s and early 80s when the Palestinian community played an important role in making the Palestinian cause visible to a Greek audience. I will briefly talk about the Greek solidarity movement and archival material from the time of First and Second Intifada and how it was reflected in Greece. It will also look into archives from more recent times, obviously, especially following October 7. The second part will focus on the archive I have curated, which focuses on Greek solidarity to Palestine. From the late 60s up until now. In that sense, is an open, ongoing project. It will briefly focus on the importance of open archives and digitization to counter erasure and to create counter narratives to dominant narratives that exclude radical and pro-Palestinian voices in Greece, examining also the archive as an open space looking into the past, the present, and the future. So let's start. About the history of Greek solidarity to Palestine. The Greek solidarity movement with Palestine has changed a lot throughout the years, along with the developments in Greece's political history. It exists within the context of Greek revolutionary history and social struggles, and it has become subject to changes along with that. The archive and the slide, it's from the PFLP bulletin in 1983, from a conference that took place in Athens in 1983. A conference of solidarity. Why I can't? Okay, perfect. Some archives help you travel back in the late 60s, early 70s struggle. The dictatorial regime known as the regime of the colonels forced thousands of leftists to leave Greece from 1967 to 1974, while imprisoning and sending to exile many others. The Greek militants, mostly of them students, especially in France, but also in Italy and other European countries, through their interaction with intellectuals and students from the global south, saw similarities in the struggle against imperialism and oppression. Greek students abroad saw the Greek anti-dictatorship struggle on equal terms with the struggles in the global south, from Palestine to Vietnam, and their publications reflected that. In Greek publication, especially Greek editors framed both struggles as resistance against imperialism, specifically American imperialism, of course. And here we can see an archive from the late 60s, early 70s, I think 1971, after Black September. And it is an article about the solidarity and friendship between Arab people, Greek people, Palestinian people as well, and Turkish people. So that's why I say it is also to bring counter narratives into the spotlight. With the fall of the regime of the colonels in 1974, the geography of radical solidarity moved from abroad back to Greece. The arrival of Palestinians in Greece during the mid-70s and 80s had a clear impact on the struggle, as they were able to narrate their story without intermediaries. I must say here that lately I have come in contact with some people that were involved in the anti-dictatorship struggle in the early 70s, but there is not much material about that, only 1-2 books. And the first Palestinians arrived from Jordan following the Black September, but of course they more came following the siege of Beirut and the invasion of Israel in Lebanon. Arguably, the solidarity movement in the 80s and 70s was fundamentally different, more radical, as it centered the narratives of Palestinians themselves. The arrival of Palestinians in the early 70s in Greece had a clear effect on the translation of Palestinian literature, political sources, and poetry, previously unavailable, obviously, to Greek audience, also due to language barriers. The late 70s, early 80s saw translation of Palestinian poetry, most of them by the General Association of Palestinian Students. For instance, the book that appears in the slide is the book Poems of Palestinian Revolution, published in 1977 from the General Association of Palestinian Students. And the second one, it's basically a small leaflet, again by the General Association of Students, that talks about the Camp David agreement and condemns it, basically. The mobilization at the time reflect the political struggles taking place in Greece. The late 70s saw Greeks and Palestinians organizing and protesting against the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974 and the occupation, and mobilized for Cyprus and Palestine alike, seeing those two struggles as similar, calling for liberation and an end to the occupation in both. So the 80s is seen as the golden age of Palestinian and Greek solidarity, with the Prime Minister Aderas Papandreou and Yasser Arafat personal connection at the core of this. His friendship with Arafat had begun earlier during the dictatorship, when Arafat offered to provide military training in the Middle East for young Greek resistance fighters, members of Papandreou's anti-dictatorship resistance movement, the Pan-Hellenic Liberation Movement. Following Israel's invasion of Lebanon and the siege of Beirut in 1982, Arafat asked Andreas Papandreou for protection when the Palestinian Liberation Organization was forced to leave. Papandreou immediately agreed to offer a safe passage. This was also to the interest of Papandreou and what he had in mind. That's why I don't totally believe it was a golden age of solidarity because of Papandreou. Then Prime Minister Papandreou and other high-ranking government officials welcomed him warmly to the dockside upon his arrival. A small group of Palestinians, associated, of course, with the General Association of Students living in Greece and members of the Pan-Hellenic Socialist Movement, stood by chanting slogans in support of the Palestinian archives, from posters to photographs centering the personal friendship of the two. The example of this, of course, is Jocelyn Saab film, The Ship to Exile, a unique representation of Greek and Palestinian solidarity, governmental one, following Arafat's journey abroad to Atlantis from war-torn Beirut to the south of Athens, and after that in exile. So from the 90s and 2000 and onwards, the support to Palestinian cause in Greece became closely associated with mostly left-wing libertarian and the radical movement, while before it was, as we saw, reflected also in the government. Papandreou was prime minister. However, solidarity since that time has become a bit conditional, and there is what I call a bit of an obsession with Israeli draft resistors, anarchists, refusers, and it has started to become more and more prominent, at least until October 7, especially in libertarian circles. In the slides, basically, you can see 3 books about Israeli anarchists, Israeli draft resistors, and so on. Those are all from the 2000 and onwards. So now I will talk about the archive I have curated, what I include on the archive, what I don't. So I decided to create an archive following October 7. Since October 7, there is a surge in publication related to Palestinian struggle in Greece and elsewhere, of course. And I should add also related to the Lebanese struggle against Israel. As part of the radical movement in Greece and involved in solidarity politics, I have been both organizing and archiving the material. Here I should mention the reasons I decided to make this archive. The creation of this archive and the digitization of archival material was also a form of political protest against the conditional solidarity with Palestine in Greece. We stand with Palestinians as long as they are perfect victims and not when they decide to resist colonialism, occupation, and apartheid and genocide. So it was an attempt to push more Greek people to engage with Palestinian cause by unconditionally supporting the resistance and Palestinians, against any solutions on their behalf that felt entitled to dictate how the liberation of Palestine would look like or should look like. The archive, of course, involved the digitization of important historical material to make resources more accessible, actually accessible to everyone, because I try to digitize everything and make it available on my site. And to strengthen solidarity through knowledge, the archive is, of course, open to everyone. The archive is in 3 languages available: Greek, Arabic, and English. Of course, this is normal because of the nature of the archive. It focuses on Greek and Arabic solidarity. Obviously, it will be in Arabic. But it was also a way to build bridges with the Arab world and talk about solidarity and different pasts, but also different futures. How I find the material. I go around second-hand bookshops in Athens. It's actually quite fun. I look into other archives. I have some material from my aunt who was involved in the solidarity movement to Palestine and Lebanon in the early 80s. Material since the 2000s. I look into archives and online. Some of them are available at the Greek Libertarian Archive. I come in contact with political groups and the broader solidarity movement. This is easy for me because I'm organized and I'm a political person the last 10, 11, 12 years. So I have contacts and I can always speak with people about that. Archiving myself since October 7 as part of the revolutionary movement in Greece. This is, for instance, a sticker from the streets of Creta in Greece that I saw when I was at a protest, a campaign actually called Target Suda Base for Palestine. And it was against the Suda base, NATO Suda base in Creta. What I do not include in the archive, material related to and by Israeli anarchists, draft resistors, refusers. This is a political decision. The point of the archive when I made it was to counter dominant narratives vis-a-vis to the solidarity to Palestinian and more broadly Arab people. The voice of Palestinians does not need an Israeli voice to become worth listening. Next steps. Further print the brochure I have made and sent it to political space and archival institutions around Greece, Palestine, Lebanon, Egypt, Turkey, and elsewhere. I have sent already actually to Lebanon, but to personal friends. And continue scanning material I have gathered since October 7. I have around 4 boxes of material and slowly I want to upload them all online in the site I have curated. Thank you so much for the time. If there are any questions, comments, anything you don't, please, yeah.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you for this valuable contribution, and that solidarity played a key role in this genocide and putting pressure on their government as we started to see action against Israel and their crimes against the Palestinians, such as Spain and South Africa and other countries. So thank you for this contribution and presentation. Now we can move for questions. One of the audience, Hassan Abu Ataya, asked if you can make the question for Christina, if you can make the archive accessible for users, the one in Arabic language.
Yeah, if people go into the site, let me see, they can see that it's also available in Arabic. You have just to scroll down. Most of the time I use it in Greek, of course, or English. But yeah, just give me a moment. Yeah, it's the Arabic one. I have sent it to the chat.
Zaynab, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. So thank you for sharing the link, Christina. The next question is for Amany. Thank you, Amani, for sharing your story with us. What are your next plans? What are you planning to do with the collected material and the discovered data and archive?
That's a great question. I mean, as I can see from Christina's presentation and others, that there is a discourse, a knowledge discourse already about liberation movements being traced across the Mediterranean. So my work is very much part of that, but also unique in the sense that broadcasting is very under researched and very under documenting. Most of it is paper trail, but broadcasting trail is very much under research. So my instinct is to do what I'm doing now, which is what you guys do. You do it academically. So I'm doing my master's and PhD on the question of public service broadcasting from Palestine to the Mediterranean, 1982 to 1990. That's what I plan to do. But I'm very open to collaboration. I'm very open to ideas. So if you have ideas how you'd like my work to contribute or to where we'd like it to go, I'm open to hear you out.
Thank you, Amani. So I have a question for Christina about Great Archive website, Christina, and making your collection so accessible. What tool are you using to create hosted? Is that
I use,
WordPress?
yeah, WordPress, but not the free edition.
Okay, so we have one more comment. It's also autoethnography, which is very special and important. So thank you for comments and questions. Okay, they ask about your contacts to put it on the chat to get in touch with you if you don't have any problem, so we can send your contacts.
Can I ask a question if that's okay?
Yeah, of course.
Christina, we're thinking and talking a lot about what it means to archive social movements, and I think it's really beautiful that part of your work is connected to the history of organizing in your family, like your aunt. That's wonderful. And then you yourself taking it up. I mean, there's just something really beautiful there I wanted to flag. And I'm also like wondering, in a way, I don't want to sound so technical, but like that classic metadata conundrum about who is the creator, what is the provenance. This is the big debate we're having about kind of launching our social media initiative. How do we keep connecting each individual item to the organization that created and used it, but as well as activities and events? I haven't spent a lot of time on your website yet, but I will for sure after this presentation. But I just wanted to welcome any thoughts you had about that kind of aspect.
So I started the archive through an Instagram page actually. So I was following all the Greek groups I work with and groups that I don't work with because I'm part of an organization, which also implies some politics. I don't work with all the groups. I have like political differences, but this was a way for me to also make sure that I work within the movement and with other people in the movement about that. So the archive is everyone's in that sense. It's part of the movement. It's not of an institution. It's for the people that put themselves involved in the struggle. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
I love the answer. Thank you.
But yeah, feel free to send me for more
Yes,
conversation on that.
It's for the movement. What else could we ask for? Really appreciate that.
I will check if we have more questions. Okay, I was interested to hear Christina mention that she's self-archiving since October. What does that involve?
Well, when I'm in a protest or somewhere like that, I go to people and ask them, "Can I get a text? Can I get a text?" And I'm just the weird person around in the protest. But in that way, I have like 4 boxes of material. And as I said, I'm part of an organization, and sometimes I have to go to the organization and ask for the material, even though I have different politics with them, but it's part of the archiving I do since October 7.
Okay, so we have one more question for Christina. If they can contribute to your archive work of solidarity from other countries.
So it focuses on Greek solidarity, especially. If the material is about Greece, Greek solidarity to Palestine, or somehow relevant, of course, people are, it's open. I have an email and I have an Instagram page, so people can send material that is relevant. Many political groups and Palestinian people from the 80s send me material to upload it in the site.
Okay, thank you. Do we have more questions?
Hello, hi, I have a question for Dr. Amany. My name is Mariam. I want to thank you so much for your presentation. Like you said, it's a very under-researched topic in terms of radio broadcasting, but also I appreciate and thank you for, sharing from your personal story about your dear father. And it was a really, really interesting and very rich presentation. I learned a lot. From my experience, having the actual recordings is really rare. Like I am trying to track the broadcasts of Samira Azam, who worked at multiple radio stations, including in Cyprus and other places, and I have yet to find them. So I really think not just having the paper trail is really special. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but also I was curious in terms of the audience for the radio station in Malta. So and sorry if you mentioned this and I missed it, who basically had access to that frequency and who was listening in, and what was the I guess a target audience, if we want to say it like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. Actually, it's very insightful, Mariam. To answer the second one, again, because I could only share so much in the presentation. The first, how they started in 1982, they started with medium wave. So they only addressed the Mediterranean. And they would cover the global South and Middle Eastern news and address it to the Mediterranean. But then somewhere along the way, they kind of jumped off and started to, without the permission of the Malta Broadcasting Authority, started to also broadcast on a shortwave, which was international. So they started to reach the Middle East and international audiences. And for that one, they started to sort of speak more about, because, as with Christina's presentation, we saw there was a lot of liberation ideology and from the PLO, and this was very much sponsored by the PLO, this radio station. They started to do culture and news very much about liberation ideology to international audiences, as well as to the Mediterranean. So both the shortwave and the medium wave. In terms of the cassette, when I asked World Radio Heritage, I emailed someone there asking them if they have any record or any cassette or any audio archives from Radio Mediterranean. The only thing that they have is the introduction song. So from what I researched, I think this is the only existing one in Arabic in the world. And it's at AUB right now, and also available to the public. It's not hidden or private. So in terms of your research on wanting to find material, I totally understand that it's very much under-documented and under-researched, the discourse in how they differed in radio broadcasting, public service. So this was a public service, meaning it was very much for the people and very much to increase the culture of Palestine in the Mediterranean and across beyond the Mediterranean as well. So it wasn't about reporting news. It wasn't just reporting news on the ground in India or in Lebanon or in Palestine. So it was about changing minds and changing people's minds about representing Palestine as a liberation movement. And cassettes are very rare, and that's why I think I encourage you to continue searching for and continue doing work in that area.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Welcome.
So do we have more questions?
رافع ايدي يا دكتورة زينب.
عفوا، اتفضل استاذ.
معلش رفعت ايدي قلت خلينا بالذوق زي ما بقول.
ولا يهمك، عفوا،
الله
اتفضل.
يخليك، فرصة الواحد يتحدث يعني ويشكركم جميعا يعني. هذه حلقة الشباب، دير بالك الجلسة اللي انت بتديريها يعني ما شاء الله عليك. بس مداخلة هي أستاذ أماني. أنا أذكر إنه أنا في 88 كنت في قبرص، 88 لما أبو عمار أعلن له قيام دولة فلسطين. يعني وكأني إن لم تخن الذاكرة يعني إنه من متابعي الراديو كمعظم الناس في تلك الفترة، فكان وكأنه يعني أنا إن لم تخن الذاكرة يعني صوت الوالد، ما بعرف حسب ما أنا سمعت صوته وحسب ما بتابع من إجمالا كانت نبرة أو المتحدثين في قنوات سواء الشورت ولا الميديوم ويف زي ما أنت حكيتي، فعلا كان دورهم رائع في رفع الهمم لأهل فلسطين، لأنه كانت بداية الانتفاضة الأولى اللي تحدثت عنها كريستينا. أنا واحد منهم يعني اللي حضروا هذه الانتفاضة. فالمعنى وكنت اهلي طلعونا على قبرص ومسمى على روسيا عشان بس ما نحبسش، لكن الهمه موجوده. وال وال يعني الانتفاضه في دمنا، والثوره دي اهل فلسطين زي ما بقول ثورجيه. تمام. لكن انت فعلا جددتي يعني شيء، عشان هيك بنحكي انه قيمه التاريخ الشفوي ولا التوثيق ولا الارشيف فعلا تحيي شيء، تحيي فينا اشياء. يمكن الاجيال الصغيره او الاجيال الحديثه يعني ما يعني في انفصال، لكن المتابع من المتخصصين بيكون له دور كويس بيتابع. لكن اللي عاش الحقبه هذه، واللي عاش الفتره وعاش زمنها بكل آلام وآماله، أعتقد شيء جميل. فلذلك أنا يعني فعلا هذا المؤتمر يعني هي جانب تاني أنا بكتشفه، إنه فعلا يذكرنا بشيء. وين أنت كنت في اللحظة هذه؟ فصوت اللي هو الوالدة السيدة أماني عفوا أحيا شيء من الماضي اللي خلانا يعني نحكي عن 88، نحكي عن شيء و30 سنة، تفوق فاق ال 35 سنة. كنت أنا لسه شاب صغير وطالع. المعنى انه وجود التاريخ والتوثيق والارشيف فعلا يحفظ الذاكره ويحفظ التاريخ ويحفظ كرامه الامه، اللي على قدر ما يستطيع المحتل انه يطمسه ياتي شخص بقامه والدها رحمه الله عليه حيا او ميتا، بس ست اماني تمام يحيي فينا انه ايوه انت في الزمن هذا. فلذلك نبقى نعلم الابناء. شكرا على الإطالة، ولكن حقيقة يعني كانت لفتة جميلة من الست. شكرا لك كريستينا
شكرا.
كمان، والشكر لكم جميعا.
شكرا أستاذ حسن على المداخلة.
ممكن بس أسأل شغلة لأماني. هل جربتي تعملي يعني كليننج للتيب؟ لأنه نحن في عنا مؤسسات ببيروت بنطفوا الأرشيف السمعي، فأكيد عندكم هيدا الشيء. وأنا مستعدة إذا بتحبي تبعت التيب ويظبطوا لك إياه، لأنه ضروري هيدا التيب يكون نظيف ومسموع بطريقة أفضل.
يا ريت يعني بتواصل معك مشان نعمل هالشي، لأنه في صعوبة كتير. حتى كل مرة بدي أحكي عن الموضوع أو أي محاضرة دائما بيكون في مشكلة. بالإضافة كمان لأستاذ حسن، أنا كتير بفهمك، لأنه الصوت له تأثير غير الكتابة وغير القراية. لما الواحد بسمع صوت بتحرك فيه شيء معين. ومشان هيك أنا يعني بهمني إنه أشتغل على هالكاسات وأعمل له كليننج. فأكيد بتصور دكتور منى حلاق، صح؟
ايه
تحكي
نعم،
معي.
رح ابعث لك هلا الموبايل تبعي، فيك تتواصلي معي على الواتساب، وانا بتواصل مع المؤسسه العربيه. في عنا مجموعه اسمها عرب ومجموعه اسمها امار، واثنيناتهم بيهتموا بتنظيف الارشيف الصوتي والسمعي. فبشوف شو انت عندك اياه كاسيت كاسيت
هو
ريكوردينج
كاسيت
صح؟
هو كاسيت الريكوردينج. ايه
حتى
فلازم.
زمن الكاسيت جميل، زمن الكاسيت جميل.
صعب هلا اسمعك، بس خلص بنتواصل سوا على الواتساب وي تيك ات فروم ذير.
اتفقنا. شكرا كثير.
Thank you, Dr. Mona. Here we come, the end of our second panel in this conference. It was rich and shows really the importance of archiving the past and the present to impose our narrative on whoever tries to erase it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.